All righty. All right. First of all, don't distract someone who's cutting your hair because they might forget that it's supposed to be of different lengths, not all one length. So there's some free advice for you. All right. This video is going to look at Watergate. All right. What is Watergate? Let's get into it. Watergate is the break-in to the Democratic National Headquarters at the Watergate complex. Now, the Watergate complex was kind of it was like a mixed-use area. So there was a hotel, but there were also apartments, and then there was also sort of an office building. So kind of like whatever that thing is off Mopac, the Dominion, I think. So kind of in that area, you got some office building, you got a hotel, you got apartments. That's the Watergate complex. And at the Watergate complex, one of the offices was the office of the Democratic National Headquarters, and it was broken into, and we'll get to that story in a second, but the motivation for the break-in, or let's say break-in directed by the White House, and even worse, the cover-up directed by President Nixon. Okay, so that's what we're talking about when we talk about the Watergate scandal. All right. So, where does this whole thing begin? Well, we have to go all the way back to 1970. We have to go all the way back to 1967. Okay. In 1967, the Pentagon began compiling a research history on U.S. involvement in Vietnam. And this came to be known as the Pentagon Papers. I'm really typing poorly today. There we go. Okay, the Pentagon Papers. By 1969, it ran to about 7,000 pages. So it is a massive history of U.S. involvement in Vietnam, going all the way back into World War II. Okay, when the U.S. had been involved with Ho Chi Minh. Obviously, this was a highly classified project. Now, Daniel Ellsberg worked on the Pentagon Papers, okay? And Ellsberg's background, like Ellsberg was a true believer in the Cold War and in containment and in NSC 68, okay? Ellsberg had joined the Marines. He had come out of the Marines first in his class. He'd gone to Vietnam as a soldier. He'd gone back to Vietnam working for the Rand Corporation before beginning to work for the Secretary for the Pentagon. So this was a guy who was deeply committed to stopping communism wherever it reared its head. But while working on the Pentagon Papers, he had come to see that our commitment to Vietnam was based on political considerations by the Kennedy and Johnson administrations and not by national security concerns. And we talked about this with Lyndon Johnson, where he talked about how he feared that if the communists won in Vietnam, that it would cripple his presidency because Harry Truman had been crippled by the loss of China. And so all this fear of a president losing power is what motivated America going deeper and deeper into Vietnam. Eventually, Ellsberg began Xeroxing the papers and smuggling them out of the Pentagon. He initially tried to pass the papers to members of Congress who showed no interest whatsoever. And so eventually, he handed the papers over to the New York Times and the Washington Post, who began publishing them. And there's a pretty good movie about this that came out several years ago. It's a Steven Spielberg movie, so it's a little maudlin in places. But if you happen to see it, a movie called The Post, which came out in 2017, and it has Tom Hanks, Meryl Streep. I think those are the biggest names in it, but a lot of it is about the Washington Post publication of the Pentagon Papers and the whole court case, because Nixon tried to get an injunction to stop publication, but lost. And so the papers continued to be published. This made Nixon, who was already paranoid, much more paranoid. Particularly, Nixon was paranoid about leaks to the press. And so the White House created a group called the Plumbers, because the purpose of plumbers is to stop leaks. So the Plumbers' first assignment was to break into Daniel Ellsberg's house, look for anything they could use to discredit him. When they found nothing there, they broke into his psychiatrist's office, looking for anything they could use there to discredit. At one point, the Plumbers were actually going to bomb the Brookings Institute. The Brookings Institute is one of those defense think tanks, and it was thought that they had a copy of the Pentagon Papers, the study. And so there was talk of bombing the Brookings Institution in order to get into the building and destroy the papers. Now, in 1972, the Plumbers are involved with the re-election of Nixon, and they participated in a whole bunch of dirty tricks. They had plans to kidnap delegates to the Democratic National Convention and drug them, and then get pictures of them with prostitutes. They talked about spiking politicians, Democratic politicians, with LSD and all sorts of other activities. Some of this is just dirty tricks. Some of it is clearly illegal. The money are being funded by an organization called CREEP, which is the Committee to Re-elect the President. CREEP's money was campaign donations that were then laundered through Mexico before coming back to the United States. Let me give you an example. Las Vegas, Nevada. A man named Larry O'Brien is standing on the corner holding a briefcase with $100,000. A limousine with the vice president of the United States pulls up. This is a guy named Spiro Agnew. Larry O'Brien gets into the limousine. He goes 2 blocks in the limousine. When he gets out, he does not have his briefcase with the $100,000. So that kind of stuff was happening all the time. And there was tons of money that was coming in. United Airlines, for instance, was having their stewardesses smuggle money. United Airlines kept offshore money. All corporations keep money in various countries around the world. In Italy, United Airlines was taking some of their profits in Italy and having their airline stewardesses put it in their luggage and smuggle it back into the United States, where it could then be given to creep. So all this kind of stuff was going on. On June the 6th, 1972, the plumbers broke into, we talked about this already, the DNC headquarters at the Watergate. And were caught. And they were installing bugging equipment into the telephones in order to listen in on conversations, and they were caught. I'm sorry, this is June 17th. June 6th is D-Day. All right, so June 17th, plumbers caught 5 men. Okay. One of them, and these are 5 men wearing 3-piece suits, carrying sophisticated electronic surveillance equipment and uncirculated $100 bills. One burglar had a phone book or an address book, and an address book was a book probably about the size of a couple of credit cards stacked on top of each other, and you would write down people's phone numbers in it. Okay. One burglar had an address book with unlisted White House telephone numbers. Okay, a burglar with unlisted White House telephone numbers. The burglars are convinced to plead guilty. And in fact, one of the conversations, and we'll get to the tapes in a second, but on June 23rd, 6 days after the break-in, the cover-up was already beginning. The talk of bribing the burglars to keep their mouths shut was already being discussed in the Oval Office by the president and his aides. Chances are everything probably would have just sort of drifted into, well, maybe, maybe not, we don't know, except one of the burglars, James McCord, told the judge that the break-in was directed by the White House. Okay. And this is about January of 1973. Well, you know, whoop-de-doo, a convicted burglar versus the president of the United States. Okay, most people are going to believe the president. There's no real evidence. Essentially, what McCord is offering is what is called hearsay. Nonetheless, heads began to roll at the White House. Okay, we can see this paper from August. Talking about, and this is a bit later because this talks about the tapes, but again, it's subordinates. Okay, subordinates are the problem, not Nixon. Subordinates, and so heads begin to roll in the White House. Okay, some of Nixon's closest aides are forced to resign. Many of them will go to jail. Particularly Haldeman and Ehrlichman are forced to resign. They're going to be eventually sent to jail. And then a guy named John Dean, who was part of the legal team for the president, counsel for the United States, Richard Nixon. Dean began to feel that he was going to be set up as the sacrificial goat. Okay. He was fired, and things began to coalesce where he really felt like this was going to be hung on him. And so Dean, in June, began telling what he knew in the Senate committee to investigate the Watergate. Right? Now, this is the word of the President of the United States versus a disgraced attorney who has been forced to resign due to Watergate. And so again, a lot of people, yeah, Dean is saying some pretty damaging things, but where's the proof, right? That type of stuff. So this goes on for these hearings. And then on July 16th, we get Alexander Butterfield Butterfield tells the Senate committee that there is a secret taping system in the Oval Office. It's a voice-activated system that tapes all the conversations in the Oval Office. Why is Nixon taping everything? Nixon wants to write his memoirs once he's no longer president, and thus he is taping all the conversations in the Oval Office. Well, this now turns into a battle over the tapes. Nixon doesn't want to give up the tapes, and the Watergate committee wants to have the tapes. Now, Nixon was urged to destroy the tapes, chose not to. Tapes are subpoenaed, a word that I don't spell very often, so let me, Poenaed. Nixon not only refuses to hand over the tapes, he in fact fires the special prosecutor, Cox, and then the attorney general and the assistant attorney general both quit. Okay. So, firing of the special prosecutor, and then the Attorney General of the United States and the Assistant Attorney General to the United States both resign in protest. Okay. This opens up a massive amount of criticism. This firing and all this quitting is called the Saturday Night Massacre. Saturday Night Massacre, which occurred October 23, 1973. Okay. Now, Nixon is forced to hire a new special prosecutor, and the new special prosecutor subpoenas the tapes. Okay. Now, here's what Nixon offered. Nixon doesn't want to turn over these tapes. First of all, Nixon offered transcripts. And they were like, no, we don't want the transcripts. Then Nixon offered to allow one member of the Senate committee to listen to the tapes. But the one member that Nixon offered was about 80% deaf in both ears. Okay? So the committee said, no, we want the tapes. Spring 1974, House Judiciary Committee begins investigating whether or not there is grounds to impeach the president. Eventually, the Supreme Court says that the president does have to turn over the tapes. And on one of those tapes is the June 23rd, 1972 tape where the cover-up began, and that is on record. So the Judiciary Committee three articles of impeachment. Misuse of presidential power, obstruction of justice for the cover-up, and failure to comply with subpoenas. So these are the articles of impeachment that are introduced, that are accepted. A group of Republican senators visit Nixon and tell him that he will not win a trial, that if this thing goes to an actual impeachment trial, that he will lose. He does not have the political support in order to win the impeachment trial. So August 9th, 1974, Richard Nixon resigns the presidency of the United States. Gerald Ford will take over as the new president, and Nixon leaving the White House again. All right, so that's sort of a brief overview of Watergate. There's several books that go into much detail. Of course, All the President's Men by Woodward and Bernstein, or you can just watch the movie. A book came out a couple of months ago called King Nixon. I have not had a chance to get through it, unfortunately. But it is supposed to have new information. King Richard is what it's called. But every now and then a new book will come out, because every now and then more information comes out from those tapes. In fact, those of you familiar with Watergate know that one of the tapes has an 18-minute gap, an erasure in one of those tapes. And so even today, they're attempting to try to figure out how to reconstruct that. Here's the thing about magnetic tape. When magnetic tape is erased, it's not really erased. It's scrambled. The information on tape is simply re-scrambled. So it doesn't ever actually go away unless you burn it. So even today, there are still attempts to try to take that 18 minutes and put it back into an order where it could actually be listened to. All right. But that is the Watergate scandal of Richard Nixon driving Nixon, the first and so far only president to resign office. Okay. And that is it for Watergate, and I will see you in the next video.